Nick, do you want to run through for attendance, please?
Chair Keeler,
Present.
Representative Bakeberg,
Present.
Representative Lawrence,
Present.
Representative Vernick,
Present.
Vice Chair Kunesh,
Here.
Senator Swazinski,
Here.
Senator Farnsworth, Senator Corinne.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. With all of us here, we call the meeting to order. So this is going to be a pretty quick meeting, I guess. It depends on how much discussion we decide to get into. It is just member discussion only. We do have some staff here that will walk through a couple things for us. But I wanted, the last meeting we have, this is the last meeting that we all have together. And so the goal here is just kind of make any last final comments, any takeaways, any things that us as members maybe took away and plan to work on legislatively. I know it's kind of top of mind for everybody as we're moving into the session. The goal of a study group is always to study the issue, to look at it, ask some questions, bring stakeholders in. I think we were able to do that. I think the conversations that we had just continued to grow. It was like that idea that like you lift up a rug to one issue and it unlocks like a bunch of other issues. And we've learned what we kind of already knew. We knew that this is an issue much bigger than just education. It falls in many different agencies and different components. And so I think we've asked really good questions. I think we've brought really stellar stakeholders to the table. I do wish maybe, we had more of our student voice join us, but I think one thing that we've learned is having the opportunity to work with our students on preparing written testimony or like recorded virtual options, because we're asking them to participate at the same time that they're in school. And that seems silly that we want them to join us, but yet like ask them to miss school. And so I think as we go into the session, if we can kind of work with our youth on those other ways, unique ways that their voices can really be part of the work that we create, especially around attendance, because at the end of the day, it's students that we want in these seats, and it's talking to students and knowing what their reasons are. I think we learned a far spread of reasons why kids aren't going to school. And the truth is it's not that they just hate school and they don't want to go. I think we learned that there's like many reasons outside of that, whether it's life situations, medical situations, lack of access to the supports that they need in the communities, and the things, the wraparound services, I think that the entire family needs. And so with that, I think we'll go through, we did listen to all the pilot programs. I know that was a long meeting last time, but I appreciate everybody staying on the extra couple minutes just to be able to listen to the 13 schools that are doing the work over the next 3 years. I think they will be critical for us to lean into because they're real life implementing things on the ground. And it feels like a lot of the schools want to build these partnerships with us, and really looking forward to doing that work over the next 3 years, so that we're crafting things that make sense in our logical policy in our education field. So with that, we'll head over to, we'll just kind of go back and forth. If everybody wants to kind of be ready, I hope over the months of conversations, people have some takeaways, some things that they want to move forward. We do have some staff here, I know from the House side. If we have any specific questions, like that you guys have been leaning to regarding any legislation ideas you have, or those can be had offline, we can make notes with staff to follow up as well. So we're going to start with our friends online, because I feel like I'm awful at making sure our friends online get to be part of the party. And so we'll start with Senator Kunesh. Do you want to start with any takeaways, pilot program takeaways, questions, and then any legislative ideas maybe you have moving forward? Those will be the 3 components that each of us go through. Go ahead, Senator Kunesh.
Okay, thank you for letting me go first. And first of all, thank you very much for chairing this whole process, Rep. Keeler. You have done just a really stellar job of it, of keeping us on task, of scheduling all the voices that need to be heard and moving us along. Your insight, your intuitiveness, and your leadership has really been, I think, really exemplar in this endeavor. The takeaways that I would say I heard mostly is that schools are not ignoring this situation. And it has been a plight for a long time. I have a brother that was a guardian at Lighton, and I asked him a little bit about this, and he said, "Oh, it's been a deal, it's been an issue forever, and it's been a serious issue and has serious consequences when students are missing school for whatever the reason is." And so I love the fact that we have been able to dive into this, and I'm especially heartened to hear from the counties and the fact that they have and are taking this very seriously indeed, and are very much looking to partner with whether it's the school district or the family services, those sort of things. And I feel like now that we have raised the level of interest, and all of these different groups know that we are keenly watching it and monitoring it and looking for, unique approaches to addressing the needs of the families who have students who are missing school so much. So I look forward to continuing this work with all of you and looking for those unique solutions. And we know that one size doesn't fit all. And so hopefully we will all be, staying flexible and nimble in ideas that come forward, and look forward to hearing from those folks that are going to help us with the problem solving. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, Senator Kunish. We'll move to Senator Farnsworth, and then after that, we'll move to Senator Kroon. How do we say it? Kroon. Okay. Go ahead, Senator Farnsworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't really have a ton more to add than what's been talked about. It's interesting though. I was actually just over talking to the counselors down the hall from my office. And one of the things that they were sharing with me, and this has to do with truancy, because I was asking them, talking to them, knowing that I had this committee coming up. But even not just truancy, but just overall the spike in behavior problems in schools. And the one common thing that they said they hear from parents is parents are like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know how to get so-and-so to school, or I don't know how to get them. And so I think that the outreach to the family is probably, I've mentioned this, the most important thing. Like, we have parents that don't, I have a master's degree in emotional behavior disorder, so I sort of know some of the tricks to try and get my kids to behave, but most people don't have that. And so I think partnering with parents and maybe even offering parenting classes, like, hey, you're having a hard time, getting your child to behave or getting your child to go to school. There are experts that are really good at this that can teach you how to do it. And again, I mentioned this, I probably mentioned it 2 or 3 times through the course of this, but the research is pretty clear that to improve truancy, families have to be involved in some fashion. The school can try something on its own, but unless the families are a part of it, it's probably not going to work. So those are sort of the comments that the thoughts that I had today before this meeting. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I have a follow-up question for you, more to pick your brain a little bit on the parent outreach, because I do agree. I think that's a huge component. And I think that's also, when I've had conversations with the counties, it feels like, counties are doing efforts around family wraparound services. Schools are making efforts around family wraparound services. Do you think the bridge and like a combination support system around families is working well from your perspective in your school district? Or do you think the partnership of like schools and counties coming together to do family wraparound services is an area that we can maybe look into a little bit more?
I'm not really sure what's being missed. I mean, possibly a partnership with the schools and the counties, but you also have to have parents that buy in. And I mentioned this, when we have conferences here at the school, the parents who don't need to show up are the ones who show up, and the ones who we really need to talk to are the ones who don't show up. And so how do we get them to show up? And I can't say that I'm an advocate for forcing people to show up, but at some point it's going to get to the point where it's like your child is not showing up to school, your child is not learning. You have to show up to these meetings, and but I mean, I honestly don't know what that looks like, but I know that I mean, just from the conversations that I have with school staff, they're like, parents, they have no idea what to do. They look at us like a deer in the headlight. Like, I don't know how to get my child, to do his homework or to go to school. And so that just kind of was a thought that I was kicking around with the counselors. Maybe we need parenting classes, to teach this, but I don't know if that would be county or school or a combination. It's just a thought.
I think it's a great thought, and any of you can like chime in, right? Like open discussion kind of format here, but it makes me think like maybe you got to take school like out to the community, right? Like maybe it's not so much like we need the parents to come to us at the school setting on our time and our space. Like if the parents aren't coming to school, where are they going with their kids? And why, like, how do we get then the school systems and these like parenting engagement coursework out into the community where a majority of that population who's not coming to school may be going? Like, I don't know, right? Like maybe asking the question and setting up the structure just a little bit differently. Like we think about literacy and we think about like, we've put books and mobiles and out to parks because that's where kids are and we want them to read. Like we're getting strategic on taking like healthcare. Like I think of mammograms, like we're putting them out into the communities. And so maybe like, as we think about some things we can address, it's kind of shifting our mind frame to, if the parents aren't coming to school, maybe the parents had some traumatic situations with school and they don't want to go and they don't feel welcome. And often we're like scolding parents when they do finally show up. I think that's one thing we've talked about is that bridge like back in. Like if you missed 15 days of school and now we found you and we're encouraging you to come back, is that a soft approach as you come back into school too? We've talked a little bit about that bridging, or a teenager goes and has a baby and they want to come back to school. How do we bridge that a little bit? And how do we go out into the community to have our conversations? I know it's interesting because one of the things I had a pretty robust conversation with Hennepin County about some of we talked about like PR work, just in general, about like getting the word out to your families on the legality of going to school. I don't think a lot of Minnesotans know that it's like the rule that you have to send your kid to school or there's legal consequences to it. And so just to kind of stem off of what you said, Senator, I 1,000% agree with you. We're only successful if our families and our parents and our generations are involved in it. But I just wonder if we put too much focus on it being in the schools and not out in the communities, maybe a little bit more. Senator Kunish, did you have a question or an additional comment?
Yeah, I would just like to share a story about when I was teaching at an elementary school in Robbinsdale, and there were all kinds of things going on that really was affecting a large number of our kids. And one of the faith communities in the neighborhood put together, they would bring all these lunches, the weekend bags of food for people, and they also put together some funds for kind of like Senator Truancy mentioned, parenting classes, and they invited parents to come to the school, and we had dinner with the teachers and the facilitator and the parents, and talked about the issues at hand and what were some of the action items that the parents came up with. And it was really a positive experience because the school and the staff got to know these parents and these families. The kids saw that there was a relationship building with the school and the teachers. The parents felt heard And they were able to reach out to more parents and say, look, come with us and get involved in this with us. And I would say it was very successful. Of course, you need to have funds to continue that kind of work every year. And we were able to do it for maybe 2 years, and then the funding went out, and we had a really unique facilitator that wasn't able to continue it. But I would agree with Senator Crew and with the rest of you that the parents definitely need to have that partnership built in, but to build that kind of welcoming relationship where we're able to say, please be a partner with us, give us some ideas. And so maybe down the road, that's something we can look at as well.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything else to add with the parent engagement piece? I feel like we can keep going. Okay. Now it's Senator Croon's turn, and then we'll go to Bakeberg after.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Been mixed up with Senator Farnsworth before, but just to clear the record, those were his ideas, not mine. And I'm not Senator Curran either. So I'm late to this task force, and so the information that I've been able to gather has been limited and less than all the rest of the committee members. So I'm at a bit of a disadvantage here. I think there have been some good ideas that have been discussed. But my general sense, this is a tough problem, and my general sense of is that it's maybe around the margins that we're really focusing on through some of these issues, like the transportation issues, all legitimate, but it's probably not the primary factor for truancy and absenteeism. The data sharing, same thing. Different cultural events to be aware of, all important. But the reason this is so hard is, to Senator Farnsworth's point, that these are fundamentally family issues that the government's trying to solve, and it's not easy to find a good solution there. I was talking to a teacher over Thanksgiving about this work on this committee, and her comment was, I was asking, generally speaking, what's the most common reason why kids are late for school or why they miss school in your class? And she said, without missing a beat, it's because they're spending all night on their electronic devices. Parents aren't enforcing that or making sure that they get to school in the morning. They haven't gotten any sleep at night because of that. And these are all really hard problems for the government to solve with things that are happening in the home. It's not to say it's not important, because it's critically important. But like I said, finding a government solution to get to the heart of the problem is going to be difficult here. It's not to say we shouldn't try. It's not to say some of these ideas are not worth exploring, because they are. And it is true for a lot of kids that the issues we've been talking about would make a difference. So they're worthwhile, but I don't think it's going to get to the heart of the problem. If it's a issue over resources, then the government can play a role in connecting families to those resources. But again, that's not always going to be the case, and it's a tricky solution. I'm caution against having the schools or other government agencies get too involved in micromanaging people's lives and in their home. But that's kind of, in my view, kind of the heart of the problem here with truancy. And so again, I didn't have all of the information that you all had. I didn't have the benefit of all the testifiers. And so I'm very aware that my perspective may be more limited than other people's perspectives. But I think we need to do some more work on some of the heart of the matter, some of the family issues that may be causing this, chronic truancy and that sort of thing, and do what we can do in the meantime. So those are my general comments.
Thank you, Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm not able to be there today. I have a district advisory committee meeting later this afternoon. So, I think Senator Kroon brings up a really, really important point. And oftentimes we'll be in a meeting at school, and we'll be talking about a lot of things that we really don't have, frankly, a lot of influence on and a lot of control over, but we kind of can spin our wheels. So we'll circle back to, okay, let's focus on what we can control. And I think that's kind of been the lens that I've tried to take with this. And, when listening to the pilot projects, I think the biggest thing that jumped out to me is really the diverse needs across the state and the diverse solutions that different pilot sites were trying to address the needs in their local community. And, I think Senator Kunish brought it up, and I think Senator Farnsworth did too, just about the need for flexibility, and that one size fits all doesn't work. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from the pilot project, but and no disrespect to the work that the pilot sites are doing, but it wasn't like earth-shattering things, like brand new ideas that we hadn't heard in the committee. It was just them really kind of digging deep and looking at what's the issue, and then how can they focus on what they can control to address the issue of truancy and chronic absenteeism. So that's kind of my thoughts about the pilot. If I look at, different ideas legislatively, I think we've talked a lot about definitions, and definitions are important so that we're all working from the same sheet of music per se. But I think some really low hanging fruit for us is the data collection, and I'm not sure if Matt Shaver is in the room today, but he really brought up some great examples of good work that's happening across the country, and we should be modeling ourselves on that. And he gave examples of I think it's Rhode Island, where there's a dashboard where we can pull things up. It's, in my mind, it's completely unacceptable in Minnesota that we don't have something like that. So that's something that, frankly, I'll be one of the things that I'll be pushing for. And if it's working somewhere else, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's figure out what another state is doing and bring that to Minnesota. And that's what educators do across the state. If a neighboring school district is doing something well, we're going to go take that idea and then tweak it to fit our community. So it's the definitions, it's the data and the data collection. And those things are important so that we can make informed decisions, because sometimes it feels like we're just kind of making things up because we don't have that data in front of us. And then it's really, to me, it's thinking about silos. I think that's one thing that jumped out to me. And we have people that are working really, really hard. And I think sometimes what we do is, in a school setting, we work really, really hard. And then the counties are working really, really hard. And families are sometimes doing the best that they can do and working hard. And I think as Senator Kunish brought up, I think a missing link for us is the faith community, and to be able to come alongside and have more of a four-legged stool to support kids and families. So kind of breaking down those silos, that's another bucket for me per se. But I just want to thank Chair Keeler. It's been a pleasure working with you on this study group. To all the members, thank you. Staying engaged. This is a really, really important issue that frankly isn't going to be solved with this study group. Maybe we uncovered more issues than we solved, but that's okay, and we can continue to work together to move forward. And frankly, this is what we're going to have to do in this next legislative session is really unpack how we can work together to come up with the best solution for our constituents. So thank you. I'll end with that.
Thank you. I would add, what terminology wise, when we talk about faith-based, I think for me as an Indigenous person, faith-based isn't necessarily the terminology that we use. It's more faith-based, spiritual-based. And so I think understanding the diversity that we have in Minnesota and the spiritual connections that all of us have, I do agree that holistically, when we look at individuals, our spiritual understanding and our spiritual connection and our spiritual belief is really important. I just want us to caution a little bit about this, like the government leaning a lot on our church entities versus being like a spiritual, cultural belief of who we are and what we do with our families and systems. I just want to, like, as we move into those conversations, want us to be mindful that spirituality and who we are is very different than just being like faith and religious entities. And I do think that matters for people across our entire state. So I agree with you. I think it's an extremely important component of who we are, especially when it comes to family preservation and the work that we have around building strong families in Minnesota. Representative Lawrence, do you want to go next? And then Senator Swazinski, you'll be after that.
Sure, be happy to, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. First study group I've ever been a part of, and it's been a real eye opener. Been great to spend the summer going through this process here as well. And so I've learned a tremendous amount. A couple of things that I will point out or highlight is one, in visiting with school districts and hearing the testimony that we got to take in over the last few months here. It sounds like most districts, if not all districts, have a plan or have a way that they're addressing absenteeism and truancy. They have something in place. It doesn't look like every other district, but it may be something that's working for them that they might be able to gain information from another district to do better. But everybody has something that they're working on to deal with this whole subject and this whole process. In listening to the pilot programs, was nice to get a report on all those. It was really good to kind of hear where they were at, what they've been accomplished, the processes, the information they've gathered, and the direction they were going with that. I just want to spotlight one, and I didn't last our meeting, but I found it interesting, and this isn't against one or against the other, right? But Cook County at the what they had to say at our last meeting, but they had some challenges, and they shared those challenges, as every district does, right? Every district has different challenges, but as they were sharing, they said that they were at 90% attendance. And I found it interesting that entity way up in northern Minnesota, there's at 90% attendance, whereas the goal of most of the study group, not study groups, but the pilot programs is to get to that 90%. And I just found that interesting. You know, it's one of those things that you looked at, and everybody's got different challenges out there. And in their particular case, they're already at what the goal is for most of the other districts. And so, and despite many challenges that we noted in our findings and in our summaries here as well. A couple of things that I noticed that I don't think are spelled out real well in our summary, and I think we're talked about an awful lot, it was flexibility. It's been mentioned a couple of times as people have given some testimony, but flexibility within districts on how they address truancy and absenteeism. Flexibility in curriculum was brought up, and I don't necessarily see us have that addressed particularly in our findings, but districts being able to use flexible curriculum to help students learn, educate, count towards credits. Flexibility in the educational process. One being if you're absent, learning from home or from a remote site, and being able to utilize some different acceptable processes in that flexibility as well. And those were kind of the two of the one that I remember coming up early in our discussion, but I don't think they're spelled out real well. And so as we go forward, I want to make sure that flexibility for our districts is still a big part of their ability to deal with this issue that we have going on here as well. And the one thing that as I've gone through some of this study that I think I'm going to throw out as a concern coming from my direction, maybe it's just a standard, I don't know which it is, but it's a current concern for mine, is I noticed that in most of the stuff I read that 3 unexcused absences is the trigger point. And in my thought process, that may be too many. If we're waiting for 3, and specifically unexcused absences. Now I know there's staff, I know there's there's time, there's staff being able to address those things, but maybe once a person already has 3 unexcused absences, they're kind of comfortable and they're maybe in a routine, or a student, right? And we're in a routine. Whereas if we're able to, and I know with our district, if you're not at school, my wife gets a call if my son's not there. It's like, well, he had a dentist appointment or he had this and we forgot to call, right? But if they're unexcused, how can we address that maybe sooner? And that's one thing that I bring to the table that kind of perked up in my mind as far as how do we help out sooner instead of waiting till maybe something becomes chronic after a while. So those are just my comments as of right now. Thank you. Thank you for being a part of the study group. This has been very interesting. And thank you for all those that came and testified, staff that's here as well, that's done research, the pilot projects. It's been very good. And I look forward, for me, it's a great springboard into starting the next session. And when we get into committee and start talking about some of these issues with more depth. So thank you.
Sounds great. Senator Swazinski and then Rep. Bernig, you'll be next.
Thank you, Representative Keeler. I just want to echo everything that Senator Kuhn said at the beginning, how hard you've worked and all the successes that may hopefully come out of this committee. So thank you. Boy, my head's spinning. I had to laugh at something you said about we want to have kids come testify, but then they have to miss school to come testify. And one of the things I tell my students all the time is don't let school get in the way of your education. And what I had in mind when I would tell them that is if you come down to the set, down here to testify, that's exactly what my mantra was, is you're going to learn more coming down here than you would in a, well, I shouldn't say in a day of school, but I've already said it. So, but like I said, my head's spinning over all this right now. And I do know that our in policy, the Senate Policy Education Committee, I do believe it's our first hearing, correct? I think it's one of the first couple hearings we're having is going to be on this issue. So, and we'll just collect further information. I'm not a data guy. I don't hate, when we're talking about Homo sapiens, we're talking about our species right now. And when we talk about data, it almost sounds like that we can fix this problem by collecting more data. And it's all anecdotal. Every kid's so different and why they're not coming to school. And you know, I as someone that, I love that you said 3 days might be too late because kids, they want to know that you missed them. And where were you yesterday? I just want to let you know I missed you. That stupid outfit you always wear or that hat. I noticed it was gone yesterday. And that's what kids, that's what drives them to come to school. And I want to say this, but I don't know how. But on senior skip, if any of my former students are hearing me say this, because I might start saying it more and more, because I want to know why when senior skip day, they came to my class, and I don't know why they did that. I don't know why they, on senior skip day, they came to SWAD's class, because I think that might be useful information for me as we move forward, is what was it about my content or my curriculum or my teaching style that might have helped them that they wanted to come to my class. But it sounds so almost inappropriate, like I'm patting myself on the back, because and I don't want to come across that way, but that's something I've been struggling with, is what was it about this teacher that they came to class on senior skip day. One of the things, I think baby steps, we're working on this, it's a work in progress, but the children and family, the new committee, the new agency, if this is a problem, I'm hearing from both sides of the aisle today that it's in the home. And maybe this new government agency and the committees and the Senate and the House that are going to be looking more closely at what's going on I know that's Senator Farnsworth talked about requiring a class in parenting. I don't know if he's still on, but there's some, I don't know, because and I think it was Farnsworth that said this, and I would echo it. Over the years of my teaching career, parent-teacher conferences, the parents that showed up are the ones that, hey, your kid's great, they're getting an A, they're here every day, your apple doesn't fall far from the tree, great job parenting. And the parents that maybe by 6th grade or 7th grade, they just got tired of hearing that they're not, that their kid's struggling and suffering, and I could see where at some point you just say, you know what, I don't know why I'm gonna go anymore. So how can we get those parents back so that they do want to come to conferences? So it's, and I know it's a adage, but it does take a village, and it's so true. And so anyways, and And I think one of the things that I'm focusing in on this session is, have we made it too easy to miss school? Have we coddled the kids where they can make the material up online, that there's no consequence? It's a consequence-free to miss school because, you know, the credit recovery type programs. And I don't know, I'm just brainstorming. I'm with all of you right now. But I do know that, again, and we've been hearing this since pre-COVID, but our kids are hurting, their mental health, their suicidal ideations, the things, one of the elected officials today talked about how they're up all night staring at their phones, and that's not healthy for anybody, adult or child. And so we've got a lot of work to do, but it's good work. And I'd love to regain the mantra that, you know, Minnesota at one time was the education state. And if we can figure out why kids don't want to come to school, that would certainly earn us the mantra that we are again the education state, because kids want to come to school, and we have a 90% rate that like Cook County does. And anyway, so thanks for listening, and thanks for all the work that everybody worked on this last few months.
Senator Farnsworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first, I just want to say for the record that I did not say we should require parenting classes.
Mandatory.
So that doesn't get out that I said.
Okay, I was confusing that with Algebra 2. I'm sorry.
Right, we should not require Algebra 2. And thank you for promising to give me a hearing on that this year. But so something that I was thinking though, as you were talking about that class, so we have court involvement when kids, you know, when kids have truancy problems, and we have court involvement and parent. Well, what if it's an or solution? What if the courts were to say, you know, you will be on probation, or your parents will take parenting classes? I mean, why does it have to be one, you know, only one thing? Oh, you're truant, so now we're going to refer you to the courts, and it's going to go through the legal system. Maybe it needs to be options. And I think, sort of to echo, I'm taking more time here. What Senator Kroon said, I don't think the government is the answer. I think maybe this should be a call to outside organizations, and it could include faith communities, you know, churches, mosques, synagogues. It could include tribal governments. It could include whatever, but maybe they need to start offering these classes and say, hey, there's a need. There are people who don't know what to do with their kids. The government isn't the answer, but maybe these outside organizations are going to meet the need, so that if they get referred to truancy, they can offer assistance. Because again, the old Ronald Reagan joke, the government isn't the answer, the government is the problem. And sometimes that is the case. And I think we need to look at a broader variety of solutions. So anyway, but I mostly wanted it on the record that I didn't say that we would force people to take parenting classes.
Thanks. I was going to make that correction for you, because I did hear you say you didn't want it to be mandatory, but it makes me think about, do any of you guys sit on JJAC, or are any of you guys a part of JJAC? So we're switching over to like the juvenile justice, something committee is JJAC, but it takes me back about probably 10 to 15 years ago. There was this movement in the juvenile, detention world, that kind of what Senator Farnsworth is saying is that judges weren't like criminalizing students. They were sending them to, juvenile detention, like intervention committees. And so they were talking circles. You brought elders in, you brought the people in their community, whether these are from your faith-based ministers or your spiritual leaders, but also like, you know, your old football coach from 8th grade. And like, it's more bringing kids together in a circle around the community, people who mean something to them, rather than saying like, you have to go and do 15 hours of community service, right? Like it's putting a community wrap around that. Maybe like, God, I'd have to go like way back into my, like, that takes me back into a Rolodex from a long time ago. But it was a really interesting structure that I know South Dakota was really trying to get off the ground, that maybe we look at something similar to that if we're going to send them through the court systems, we're not penalizing them. We're sending them through a court system to re-engage with the community, and maybe loved them so much at one point, and reconnect them into their why and their purpose. So just making a note for myself that I think maybe that's another lane in JJAC is a really outstanding group of judges, PO officers, people that like probably work in that lane maybe a little more, that I like that suggestion that outside these parameters, maybe those are other conversations we could lean into a little bit more. So thank you. Is anybody else on that? If not, we'll go to Representative Vernick.
Thank you, Chair Keeler. And I echo the same. Thanks for all the work that you did. I know it's not your backyard, right? So coming down here is a real commitment, and I appreciate that. And then all the staff who've come and helped. So I do appreciate that. I maybe took a different approach to this meeting. So I had a ton of questions. And one, we did talk about definitions. And one of the things that kind of stood out to me is, you know, what happens when a district doesn't adopt the model policy that we've suggested? And if we have definitions, shouldn't schools report on that versus needing a section under the MDE? This is just right from the document that we had. I think that the parent involvement is important, but I also think you need to have the services available, and early intervention is key and important. So I don't disagree with you on the 3-day thing, but I would also say early intervention, not just high school. Like, what are we doing in elementary school? How do we establish that the chronic disease management, right? We heard from a student who was struggling with chronic disease management. And if you have access to a full service community school with a school-based health center, they can help you with that and hopefully keep you in school. As a parent of 3 kids, and one of mine would be, if we would have stayed on the same path, probably part of this conversation. But we were able to access occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech language services that went from a child in kindergarten and 1st grade crying every day to go to school and hating school, and now in 2nd and 3rd grade absolutely loving it and joining student council and Lego League and wanting to be involved. But it was early intervention that made that happen. Also having access to medical services in my community, not having to drive an hour or 2 hours to get occupational therapy, physical therapy, and literacy instruction. So I think some of that is what we heard in the student testifiers. One of the things, let's see, in our report, we had some breakdowns on absenteeism, and I was just wondering, so it was page 8, section 4, you know, up to 10%, between 10 and 29%, where those came from. And these are questions that can maybe be answered offline, but just questions that I had. Where did we get these? Is this a national standard? Are other states using this same breakdown? And as much as, like, you know, let's not reinvent the wheel. I think we heard that with Mr. Shaver's testimony around Rhode Island. And yes, as Matt and I don't always agree on things, I think it's a good thing, but I also would say caution. Rhode Island has, like, I don't know, was it 68 schools or 63 schools? We have 330. Is it scalable? How will that data be used? Are we just putting it out there to shame schools? Are we going to do anything with that? Let's see. Homework credit, is that a thing? So in the document, we talk about giving homework credit. I wasn't sure if that was a real thing or not. Or is that where we're sort of talking about the butts in seats kind of piece, like giving credit for experiences in the community that seem to interest students? I think we heard quite a bit about that. I believe Mary Frances Clardy had a bill similar to that last session. Also, the cultural activities, could this be expanded to include other opportunities? I think you pointed out, Chair Keeler, about faith institutions. There are plenty of families out there who don't belong to any faith or spiritual, but do participate in other activities. I think of, like, going to the Boundary Waters as part of one of your science classes. Maybe my school district has the School of Environmental Studies and they do things along those lines. Overall, I struggled with, it doesn't seem like we're really getting to the root cause of it. Like, I think one of my colleagues here has mentioned that this isn't, some of these things aren't going to actually change the attendance piece, the definitions. It's not going to impact students' attendance. However, it's good to be consistent. So school districts adopt their own policies. What's to stop a district from adopting a more liberal attendance policy, thus bringing the number of their chronically absent down? And then one of the other questions I had, do charter schools belong to MSBA and would they be included under this policy piece? MSBA, and I don't know that for sure. I'm legitimately asking the question because I believe you have to pay to be a part of MSBA, maybe not. Would this be readily available? Does anybody know that answer? No, they're not here. So is this available to all schools or just members of MSBA, their model policy? So I worry about that we're putting in, the burden on MSBA, but then it would only be available to their members. So how long do we look at this regarding, so this is with school staffing, for funds to schools, like are we going to put funds towards some of these things regarding absenteeism? Is that in perpetuity? I think we talked about like liaisons, absenteeism liaisons as a good, you've mentioned that quite a few times. And I think that's a great idea. I think I'm all for school nurses and social workers and counselors and psychologists and liaisons. But I caution the use of funding in perpetuity. And then let's see. So at the bottom under community support, we have a lot of things happening in that section. And some of it is, I maybe disagree with Senator Farnsworth. I do think the government should be funding some of this stuff more, including school nurses, social workers, and alike. Not Senator Farnsworth, not that you said we shouldn't do that. It was more of and maybe it was Senator Crew and the government. I think there is a role for us in this with respect to education as it relates to school health and the health of students, the mental health of students, keeping them in the classroom, addressing chronic disease. And then transportation. So I had a couple of questions around transportation. One of the questions or one of the comments in here says requiring transportation of students at risk of truancy. And if we're requiring that, how does that work with open enrollment? I would struggle to require a school district to require transporting a student who is at risk for chronic absenteeism if it's not their student. I don't know if that makes sense, but. And then there's a small pot of money for funding students to the ALC program. Maybe we need to look at that as a possibility to expand transportation funding. And then one of the last weird things was it talks about using unmarked vehicles for transporting. And I don't know if all small communities have access to unmarked vehicles. So could that be a barrier for services being provided to schools if they don't have that? And then training for training's sake. So under transportation, it also talks about training. And the question I had was what type of training and why? And what's the purpose of the training? So are we just training to train or what is the objective of that? I struggled to understand that. Also, the school staff, unless we fund these positions, I would suggest these as a recommendation. I hate to put another, you must do this, but without giving some funding for any positions that would be recommended that schools hire. So those were kind of my notes from that. Like I said, I took a little different approach. I had a lot of questions out of our report, but yeah. So thanks. I think this was really interesting. I'm excited to hear that in the Senate Ed Policy, the first meeting is going to be around this subject. I will definitely tune in to hear more. I agree about hearing from students. To me, those were the most impactful. And then the counties, the Be at School, the successful programs, like how can we do more of that and mirror that in other communities? Thank you.
Super. So just to clarify, I think most of the questions that you were stemming from came from our draft recommendations that we shared out, I think, over a month or so ago, that then we all discussed. So when stakeholders were in the room, so none of the draft recommendations those were put in place for us to just put all the conversations that we had, the different ideas that were like spouted off. If that was something we each wanted to maybe work on. I know that the offer was always open for Nick to meet with as kind of the sounding guy to like dig into any of this. And outside of just our committee meetings that we've had, I think I was probably the only member that really reached out to try to work on things. So I just want to tell you where I guess we've landed. The recommendations in the draft are for all of us. Just use those as you need. They're notes basically of all the areas. None of that is actually going into any legislation. I think your questions are absolutely the questions that we just need to continue to ask. So do that. And hopefully then it starts more opportunities for us to have legislation. I do want to call staff up. Ms. Para, if you want to come up to the front, and I don't know if anybody else wants to join to go. Okay. And so what we've done, because this has been when Representative Bakeberg and I thought, wow, and I think he's still on, right? Like, what a great idea. Let's like pull together a study group and we'll like figure out some great, it'll make sense to us what we're supposed to do. And the reality is like, we've just, I think he said it, right? Like in the effort to solve problems, we've uncovered more problems that we have. And so even from the draft recommendations to say, we want definitions to be more clear, but then how is, if the schools are doing like data definitions, we don't even know truancy or tardy. I think in some of our schools we're defining. And so what I've kind of taken upon myself with, I've reached out to others just to gauge is so many of the recommendations on our draft language were all over statute everywhere, whether it falls under education, transportation, now DCYF, there's areas that are in health that are part of school over to like DHS, and it's just been everywhere. And, you know, the goal of the study group, and I believe going back to the intentions of like Representative Bakeberg's and I's first conversation was, we knew we weren't going to solve any problems. The hope is that we're at least building a foundation for us to move forward, which is probably at a minimum a decade worth of work for us to really even start to make impacts, because it's like this house of cards that it plays a role across everything. And so what we've done with the help of our brilliant staff, I do have to give credit where credit's due, right? Like sometimes our staff sits here and really helps us. And so what we've seen and what I've seen in other spaces in the education world is that we're basically just creating a landing spot to move statute that's all over into this one area. We did it with charter schools. So we knew where all the charter school statutes are located. So to be very clear, right, and Ms. Para can go over this, none of this suggestion that you have in front of you is new language. It is just moving what's already somewhere else in statute into some sort of chronological order that legislation tells us from what is the compulsory language on why it makes school a requirement, all the way through some of these areas, transportation, healthcare, right? Like access to things all the way down to child removal. Now, I'm sure we've missed things in here. Two things that I made note of is curriculum requirements. Like what are the curriculum requirements? Because I do think that that's come up. If maybe we could add this on here. And then the school board requirements when it comes to local flexibility and what a school board can decide versus what's a state requirement. I'm not totally sure where we would add that. But so I just, this is where we landed in the work that we've tried to do just to give us all some sort of a landing spot. So if transportation spoke to you, hopefully this just tells you like where in statute some of that is at. This is what we hope to present as a group, this is what we'll be voting on, as our recommendations coming out, because it is no new legislation. It is all just organizing the chaos of legislation we have now to build us something that is rooted in bipartisan, ongoing efforts to address absenteeism. So with that, Ms. Para, I'll let you kind of walk through what we did here, understanding that some of this moves into other agencies and entities that are maybe a little bit outside of your scope. Just let us know which areas maybe those are, because I think one of the things we need to do is next step is adding the other agencies into these conversations. So go ahead, introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you, Chair Keeler and members. Christina Para from House Research. I covered the education policy portfolio in House Research. So the CP6 draft that you have in front of you, there should also be a bill summary in your packets of the summary, of the draft. And it's would code a new section of law in chapter 120A. And subdivision 1 clarifies that the scope of the sections that are referenced in the rest of the section are related to student attendance. And it does attempt to go roughly chronologically, starting with in subdivision 2, the age of instruction, and noting that those are in 120A 22 subdivision 5 and in 120A. The subdivision 3 relates to the district of residence, and that's noting that in 12820 notes that admission to a public school in the resident district is free. And then in referencing the open enrollment provisions in 124 DO3 and noting when that non-resident district may terminate the enrollment of a student that's habitual truant and where that is in statute. Subdivision 4 refers to the non-public school student reporting. This is normally relates to the homeschool students and the parents that need to report to the superintendent of the district where they reside. Subdivision 5, this references the transportation statutes, and you can see this is, I think, 4 separate chapters of law. So 123B88 has the school board transportation requirement. However, students' bus riding privileges may be revoked, and those are in 121A59 and 123B91. And then chapters 169 and 171 are more of the transportation chapters. So those 2 are referenced there as well. Subdivision 6 relates to students with disabilities, and much of that is federal law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. However, some of it is also in state statute. 123B88, for example, references transportation for students with disability, and chapter 125A has the other substantive requirements for providing students with disabilities a free, appropriate public education. Subdivision 7 relates to funding and a district's ability to use its unrestricted general fund money or its basic skills revenue for programs to reduce truancy under section 126.15. Subdivision 8 relates to absences and how those are recorded. So paragraph A has references 120A22, subdivision 12, and how a parent, the way the statute is written, a parent may apply for a district to excuse a student from attendance, and there are listed reasons why a district may approve an absence being excused. And references section subdivision 12, identifying the persons to whom a parent may apply for an excused absence at the district. And paragraph B requires references section 128.35 and the requirement there that a district make reasonable efforts to accommodate a student who wishes to be excused for particular reasons. Subdivision 9 references that 15-day drop that members heard about from districts, and how if the student is absent for 15 consecutive school days, student can be classified as withdrawn. Subdivision 10 notes where the truancy statutes are coded, and that's chapter 260A. And it's a pretty short chapter, but that has a number of the provisions that come up in this area. including community-based projects, truancy service centers, school attendance review boards. Those are in 260A4. In paragraph B, you'll see it notes that 3-day kind of trigger that members discuss. That's under section 260A02. And then the county attorney programs, those are referenced in chapter E as being in 260A07. And there's also a reference to the data sharing with the county attorney programs. Chapter 13 generally deals with the data sharing provisions. And then subdivision 11 gets into the maltreatment issues. Those are generally in chapter 260C. And that's where you find definitions such as in child in need of protection or services or habitual truant. The presumptions regarding the intent of the parent when a child is absent from school. That's also in chapter 260C and section 260C04. And then finally, habitual truancy may be considered reportable maltreatment of a minor under chapter 260E. So that references the definition of maltreatment in 260E03 subdivision 12, which includes neglect. And that can, neglect includes failure to ensure the child is educated as defined in chapter 120A and in 260C. And then the final subdivision refers to criminal penalties. And there are a couple of provisions that relate to potential criminal penalties. One is 120A 34, and that would be a petty misdemeanor. And then they're under section 60926. There's potential felony charges there for a person who causes or contributes to a child being habitual truant. So generally anything that's outside the education code, which is chapters 120A to 129, those are kind of different subject areas, whether it's, I'm not sure where maltreatment goes in terms of committee, but transportation, public safety, et cetera.
Sounds great. Like it took a lot of months of like scattered brainness to try to like make that make sense. But what we really tried to do, and I think what staff has done a great job at, is one of the things I've learned, and I feel like it's crazy going into my 5th year, is I still just don't know where the nuts and bolts of the statutes are. Like the issue is an easy thing to talk about, but where in policy and legislation do you actually go to start to dive in to say, what does statute tell us? What is the requirement? I know sitting with Hennepin County for hours, we realize there's just this overlap that they don't make sense when they line up and try to talk to each other. So what the goal here is, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Para? Seeing none, you want to just hang tight just in case we have some questions as we chat, like sometime. Go ahead, Lawrence.
How much more statute is out there that we have no idea? I mean, I wouldn't know, but is there quite a bit that you don't think is referenced here yet?
Ms. Para?
Chair Keeler, Representative Lawrence, I think it depends on what you think is related. So if you're thinking about things like full service community schools as being related to student attendance, then that could be added here. I think it depends on how you define the scope. And I think that might differ from individual to individual.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think one area that we intentionally left out was, and not that we left it out because we didn't hear it, was the access to mental health and the access to like community-based services. We can add things like that. It just gets to be then like very cumbersome, I think. And so a big part of this was trying to highlight the legal pieces that say, here's the requirements that you're in school, down to then how does it lead to then like family dissolve, family removal. We're more than what we can add more, but to try to make it not so cumbersome, I think we tried to stay away from the community resource lane and the mental health resource lane, because those tend to lean maybe a little bit more into DCYF and DHS areas more than education areas. But would that be something that we could add easily, or what areas? What are you thinking, Lawrence? Lean into what you were thinking a little more.
Just literally was curious about, is there another book,
Oh.
right? Or is it just 2 pages and that really relate? But I appreciate your rendition of what we were after. And so that answers my question completely. Is
Yeah.
that we were really focused on, we didn't want to burden, we just wanted to get to the nuts and bolts.
Mhm.
So thank you.
And we can add more, that's the beauty of amendments when we get into session, that this was just kind of like, can this be the train that we all get on to say, these are some of the core issues around attendance that we know when we talk to our education and our county and community partners that they all agree are issues. And we're happy to expand that then like through the amendment process if we want to add some more that we want to look into in the future. But I think the answer is that there's probably an entire novel out there really that's related to this. And that's what we've figured out. Yeah. Any other questions for Ms. Para? Senator Kunish?
Well, as we're talking about this and where we might go with some of these things, it might not be that we are going to have to tap other areas of expertise and other committees to partner with us on these things. So Health and Human Services, maybe some of the judiciary areas. And so the burden might not land 100% on education, but we would be able to find other ways to partner with other committees and those areas. So I don't think education always has to carry the entire burden.
I would agree. I think that's what we've kind of said over and over is that the reason why it's not successful is because we need to break down the silos. I'm really hoping, if I'm being honest, DCYF steps into this space a little bit more too, from like, they do a lot with the littles that, they say like, what is 3 to 5 or something, that then the counties start to intervene with family interventions that like, but that's a whole other lane of conversation. That'd be back to like children and families. It's just so different. So, without building the box bigger than it needs to be, we tried to be reasonable to stay within, our education lane, knowing that this is a decade-long conversation. So, does anybody else have any questions for Ms. Para? Oh, Ashley, hi. Do you want to step up front? Is it a question? Statement.
Statement, superintendent's requirements for truancy, what they have to submit each year. I'm not sure if that is on there, but I feel like that may be important of the requirements that superintendents and principals have.
And MDE's reporting probably just in general. Like, we can chat more. We'll chat more about it. But this is the concept, right? That we're trying to roll with. If we know, but the ball can get pretty big pretty quick. Does anybody else have any questions? I would love, and I'm sure you would all love, if I gave you some of your time back today, because this is the last thing. Go ahead, Representative Vernick.
So I just have like a structural question.
Sure.
So our task was to submit a preliminary report and then a final report by the end of the month. What we have that we talked about where I was referencing most of my questions is the legislative report. Is that what will be submitted from this committee, or is it this bill that is going to be submitted as our report, or both, or?
Right. So I think it's going to be both, because when we did the draft recommendations, it was back onto the group to lean in to communicate with Nick about where we wanted to go. We've figured out the structure of the recommendations. And so I would just suggest, if anybody wants to lean into more of a recommendation lane, meeting with Nick to help put that together is going to be different. The buckets that are going to come into that will be much smaller. It will not have all of the definitions and all of our notes in it. It will really be the 8 buckets, like saying, we recommend that school boards and student boards, or school boards and associations, look at streamlining definitions. None of it's legislative, none of it's money ordered. The only thing coming out of it from our recommendations is that we have a landing spot for all of this to land legislatively, and we've created the landing spot for all of us to move forward with legislation. I'm not totally sure that answered the question. Nick, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so Representative Vernick, I think this study group needs to finalize a report, including recommendations. And that can include the recommendations that were in the preliminary report, or it can include this legislation. I would recommend this study group vote on what it wants its final recommendations to be, and then a final report, including those, will be sent to the relevant committees. I'm not sure if I answered your question either based on the way you're looking at me, but I hope I did.
No, sort of, yeah. But then my next question, it's December 16th and we have till the 31st. So I was just wondering about what your turnaround time would be. I don't want you to have to work over the holidays. So
Yeah. So, I've written potential motions for the study group to make. And that would be that they approve the final report as edited today, and that staff are authorized to prepare the report and include any technical changes. And then the chair and vice chair would be authorized to approve that. I think as nonpartisan staff, it would be more appropriate if this group is able to sort of come to more substantive agreements on what they want to be in the report, rather than doing that afterwards. Obviously, technical stuff or finalizing language we can do later this week.
Did you have more? Representative Lawrence?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would, based on, if we're gonna make a report, I feel very comfortable if we make a report based on what we have before us today. If we're gonna change anything, in my feeling, we would want another meeting. Based on what, as I entered this meeting, we were looking at these reports, whether we approve them or not, is going forward. Not that today was major changes or major additions to any reports at this point in time. So, and I kind of see there's a lot of questions that came out, there's things that still need to be answered, but I think that I see that as part of our report. Those are just unanswered questions yet that are to be found in the future, not necessarily answered by our committees right now. So going forward, my recommendation is, or the way I would see it, is that we would either approve what's before us today, or we would have another meeting to approve another draft. And so that's just my perspective on it.
Representative Bakeberg?
Thank you. I would echo what Representative Lawrence said, and I think, in our preliminary report that we got in October, we had 8 different recommendations that we had landed on, discussed, and then there were tons of notes under each one of those recommendations. So I view those notes as resources for us as members to work together on to draft legislation under those different buckets of recommendations. So whether it be community engagement or consistent definitions, we have some good starting points on where we could start from to draft legislation. So I'm very comfortable adopting our report based off of those 8 recommendations. And then also the bill summary that we have gives us a good landing spot to jump off of. So I see our preliminary report from October as a great discussion tool that led to our 8 buckets per se that we can use, and then that's going to lead into the bill summary. So that was my mindset coming into it. I was very comfortable with our ongoing discussions that we've had, and I'm prepared, at least from my standpoint, to move forward.
Okay, is there anybody else? No. Okay, so let me back into what we're doing here. Okay, so the draft recommendations were like 8 pages long with a drop of all of our notes. Since we didn't change any new buckets, what the recommendation draft will literally say, recommendation 1, explore commonalities in definitions. Recommendation 2, coordinate amongst local and state agencies. Recommendation 3, explore community engagement, look into community engagement, culture, lived experiences. This is where then like all of the curriculum information. Number 4 is MDE reporting. Make sure that we're looking at data increases. That's what Bakeberg talked about as maybe one of the things he's leaning into. Data sharing, that's one of the things that we've really added into this area just to lean us into that statute. Bucket number 6 recommendation will be to explore potential dedicated truancy staff, looking at if that is maybe a state or a county or school district area. Bucket number 7 is identifying transportation needs in areas that we can get students to and from school safely and appropriately. Number 8 is exploring community support options. I think this is where the conversation not only around community and schools, but our spiritual community and faith-based opportunities. And so that is what the final recommendations will come out as. It will look like a very quick outline, and then also leaning into the legislative recommendation that we have, creating a landing spot for us to move forward in legislation so that everybody's not seeing all of the random notes that we put in on our draft language. So what the community will get is just the 8 buckets and then the outline drafts that people can look at legislation. It just, in our mind, seemed cleaner. Well, all of us can always keep the draft recommendations for our future notes. Does that help clarify things for everybody? Representative Vernick.
So we won't actually see the final draft or the draft before we vote on the final. We're just going off of what you just said, right? Like, is this because
Did you put a draft together in the form, in the template that I sent you?
No.
Okay, so go ahead.
I think, Representative Vernick, then, I would recommend that the study group make a motion of what it wants those final recommendations to be, if it wants it to be just a list of those, and then, staff would make that and send it out based on your instructions.
Sure. Representative Vernick, Representative Lawrence.
Madam Chair, I agree with Representative Vernick is that if we're going to approve something, we should see it. We can make that motion, just like you're saying, of how it should look. But before we all agree that this is what we're going to present to the Senate and the House come January, I think I'm of the feeling that I'd like to see it printed as far as, okay, I agree that that's what we're, I can agree on these right now because they're before me. But I'd like to see that as well before we as a group say yes. And whether that's a Zoom call that we all vote on at some point in time in the future, I'm happy to make that motion. I don't think I have an issue with what you presented as far as the idea of how you want it to look. I don't have an issue with that. I just want to see the hard copy that we're going to send forward before we vote on it. That's
Yeah, I think that that's fair. I think similar to like how we do our conference committees, the final report will go out to all of you guys to sign before we move to any legislative things. I just, I'm gonna be really honest. I feel like we had this draft stuff in front of us for quite a while, and then coming here, I thought we were under the assumption we would just go through these drafts smaller, but so are there new recommendations that you want to add to these 8 buckets? Can I ask the committee if there's new recommendations to the buckets that we've already been discussing that anybody wants to add at this point? Representative Vernick.
No, nope. I just, because today was the member discussion, so I thought we were talking about these more. I don't think that there should be new buckets. I think the buckets are pretty encompassing. It's more about what does that final language look like? And what does our final report look like?
Nick, will you get that out to us? When can staff, or when would we expect to see that as a group?
I'm not entirely sure, but I hope to have something by tomorrow or Wednesday.
Okay, and then members, you guys can look at your emails and review the final draft.
yes.
Okay.
And then, Madam Chair, follow-up question that how would we approve it? Are we all going to have a signature on it to say, yes, we all agree with this final recommendation? Or are you going to have a Zoom call at a certain time for us to call in and say, hey, looks good, we're all in favor? What process would you like to? I'm open to either.
I think a signature process is fine, as long as nobody intends that there's gonna be any major changes that you see based on what we've approved here. Senator Farnsworth, I see your hands up online.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So something that just occurred to me, and I might be remembering something wrong, but I'm looking at numbers 6 and number 7. And I don't know why I didn't think about this sooner, but I thought that maybe the first meeting we had, I thought that a comment was made that we're looking for ideas that don't necessarily cost any more money. And maybe I'm misremembering it, but it seems like number 6 and number 7 could get to be fairly expensive when we're looking at a tighter budget coming up. One of the things that I'm thinking of with the transportation, I mean, schools already provide transportation, and I know with the like the model that they have over in Deer River with the community school, I know that they get flexible with transportation, but I guess I'm just wondering, did we change the purpose, or did I mishear that we weren't looking at trying to spend new money as a result of this study group?
We aren't spending any new money. So I feel like I need to reel you guys back in, because you're taking what was in the draft recommendations as actual language that we're moving forward with. Those were just conversations that were popcorn throughout the last, I don't know, 5 months that we've been having these conversations. So we put them on paper for us to all start to explore. Through those conversations, we all agreed, we're not spending more money. We're not adding more legislation. We don't want to add more mandates to schools. And so what has come out of those conversations, and this is why the draft recommendations is not what we're going to see in the final draft. The final draft, that pocket is literally just going to say, explore transportations for students to get to and from school. And then that's why when we have the bill in front of us, no funding is added, no changes are made. All we're saying is that in subsection 5, those are the transportation statutes that were discussed that we recommend people to look into at some point moving forward, that we've identified those as transportation concerns. And so it's not moving forward in any legislative suggestion. We're saying that the school board and the school systems have these areas of statute that maybe we can look at to just explore within the next year, 2 years, 10 years. That's it. So none of the ideas that were in the draft, like the bullet points underneath, are actually making it into public suggestions moving forward. So that's why when we broke it down, it will literally bucket 7, like recommendation 7 just says for the legislature to explore or look at these areas. And then we've provided the statute of those areas to look at. Because we're not suggesting anything with any money to anybody or any mandates of any changes to anything, really. Does that help clarify anything?
Yeah, well, a little bit, but it does, like it says, encourage legislature to provide funding for school districts. So we are sort of, and it says to purchase type 3 vehicles. So we are encouraging them. And the same with, I think, number 6. Let's see, more funding for school districts. So, I mean, these are recommendations.
Those are draft recommendations that you're looking at from a prior meeting that we had. Those were just for us to start saying, of the conversations we're having, here's landing spots that stakeholders, that conversations arose. Asking anybody during the draft recommendation stage, were these pieces of legislation anybody wanted to move forward with? If any of you had found it interesting to lean into any legislation or options, you could have brought them here for us to discuss. What is being sent to the legislature is just saying, hey, in our conversations, we discussed transportation as an issue. We're suggesting that you as the legislature look at options for suggestions on transportation, here's where the statutes lie. And so we're not sending the draft recommendations to anybody. Those were for us to see. So we're not saying to the state legislature, we encourage you to buy more vehicles. Those were conversations that came up in our stakeholder conversations that we all spitballed and said things around the table that then each of us as members were to go back into our legislative brains and with our staff and our partners to say, what could we maybe build out of this? And so none of the actual suggestions that we're sending out say that any money is required. We're just leaning legislators into areas to look at moving forward. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, and I apologize. This is my first legislative study group, so I don't exactly know how the process works. So I appreciate you clarifying that.
Yeah, it's okay. I think we're literally going to work on something. Is that what you're doing right now? We're literally working on something that will give you guys, you can see what we're trying to do. But the main question that we need to vote on is the legislation that's in front of us as well. Do you want to print that and get that to everybody? That would be great. Yeah, it's literally just deleting all of the notes and just leaving the 8 buckets on the top. So we'll get that for you guys to see. And then the legislation piece as well. Senator Swazinski.
I was just going to say that was my understanding of what is exactly what you just said, is the working group was going to gather all the information and then come up with the bucket list. And then we in our individual committees would take a look at it during this session. So no money was appropriated, no money was disappropriated, if that's even a word. It's just a bunch of recommendations based on a bunch of stakeholders and intelligent people testifying so that was my understanding from day one.
Thank you, Senator Swazinski. Anybody else? Oh, I can't see if anybody's online. No, okay. Do you guys give us 1 second to print? We will print the recommendations for you to see what those buckets will look like. Does anybody have any questions regarding the actual base of the legislation piece that we're bringing? Keeping in mind, this is not adding any new legislation. It's not making any policy changes. It's not adding any money. It's just creating our landing spot. Yes. And then keeping in mind, my suggestion would be the notes that I had that maybe we could add would be curriculum requirements, school board flexibility, community-based access supports, like the mental health, community-based stuff, and then superintendent requirements. Yeah. Do we need to add, those were just notes as like you guys were talking when we were talking about the legislation piece with Ms. Para. Are we okay? My motion would be, we're waiting on the recommendations. That will be a second motion. My motion with the legislation landing spot would be, I would like to make a motion that we move forward with the landing spot legislation language as is, and then we can add amendments to it once we get through the first committee hearing, and we can see what we all want to add and what other colleagues of ours want to add just for staff purposes. Or, okay, wait, that's my first motion.
I second.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Representative
just so I
Lawrence.
understand the motion completely, your first motion is just what we have before us today.
The landing spot legislation unedited.
Unedited.
Yep,
Okay.
as is.
Thank you.
Vernon, that's what you agree you're seconding? Yes, okay. All in favor of that, please say aye.
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 All opposed, say
Aye.
no. Oh, who was it? All opposed, same sign?
No,
That was, which senator was that? Croon?
correct.
Okay. Seeing the majority recommends the landing spot legislation, that is one of the recommendations we will send out. And then are you ready to print that?
Send it off.
Oh, it's being printed in Centennial. This is the perk of it. Can we email it to you all?
Yeah.
Does that work? Okay. Okay, so then I'll make a motion that pending that the recommendations that you're all seeing in your emails, as they come back signed as approval, as your sign of approval, once we get a majority approved signature, then we will add that to what we recommend to the legislature moving forward.
I'll second that. Was that your motion, Chair?
Yes, thanks,
Yep,
Senator.
I'll second that.
Any discussion on that?
Madam Chair.
Representative Lawrence?
So that technically is just gonna be the titles, right? Isn't that what Nick is working on us right now? That would be just be basically the titles of our preliminary recommendation,
Mhm.
the 8 titles.
Yes.
Okay.
With the landing spot. Wait, no, yes.
No,
This
we already
motion,
approved the
the
landing
landing
spot.
spot is already there. This motion is only the titles that we're working on now for the final recommendation list.
Okay,
Any other discussion?
Madam Chair.
Representative Lawrence?
We're approving it as we're understanding it, but it won't be officially approved until the signatures are on it, correct?
Correct.
What's
I
your
think-
motion?
Yes, my motion is saying that based on majority approval, based on signatures.
Yep.
Once we get to that point, we are okay submitting this with the other recommendations, meaning we do not have to come back to a meeting collectively to vote for the movement moving forward.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Nick.
Staff suggested, I could share this on the screen so members both here and online could see it.
How does that, okay, are we okay with that? Burning? Okay, online, then they should be able to see it. Oh, was that your idea? Oh, so smart, so smart. This is why we love our staff. You want to make it a little bigger? My 40-year-old eyes maybe need some help. So it's literally just exploring, like asking the legislature to explore these areas. We're not asking to fund, we're not asking to build, we're not asking to change anything. We're just saying, these are the pockets that in our conversation, we believe are the areas that we should venture into. The nice part about this is it provides, it's also not even saying it has to be a school district to do it. It's anything. Anybody can explore these conversations for us to expand what we need to do in the movement moving forward. Is this helpful?
Yes.
Okay. Is it helpful enough that everybody can see it, that we could maybe make a motion that we can just approve this as one of the recommendations, or do you still want to look through them and have a signature online? Yeah, but we haven't finalized it. So do we need to make a new motion that we can just approve what's on the screen as our recommendations? I think too, this makes it clear so that you can see to Senator Farnsworth's conversation, we're not asking for any investments. It is, and we're not asking for anything new. Giving people a moment. This stems from the weird work I did in looking at past study group responses. They can either be very, 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 very long or very quick and to the point in areas that we want to expand. And I think in the work that we've done, we've realized that we still just have so much more exploratory area to do in all of these spaces. We're not even close to being ready to really submit any policy or funding changes in my mind. So unless anybody else feels different, does somebody want to make a motion to approve these recommendations as viewed in front of us?
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Representative
you
Lawrence.
have a motion and a second on the table as of right now.
So,
So all we technically need.
so
to
can
do-
we motion it no? Can we can I withdraw the motion? Okay, I withdraw the motion. Do you need to secondly withdraw our motion? Kunish.
I will withdraw my second if necessary. Yep.
Okay,
Chair, do you want a motion?
yeah, yes, Yes, Representative Bakeberg.
All right, I would make a motion that we adopt these recommendations as presented on the screen. You know, with the understanding that there's no funding, there's no legislation tied to this. So that's my motion.
Can I get a second? Swazinski seconds. Any discussion? You sure? Okay. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those
Aye.
opposed say. All those opposed say no. Oh, we passed. Yay. Okay, so I think that we're good now on what we're recommending, just so everybody knows, we're recommending the outline of recommendations that we saw on the screen along with the baseline legislation unchanged. The hope would be that those come with jackets and that we all sign on collectively as the bill comes through, so that when we're doing those presentations, we show the bipartisan work that we did in this committee. We also need to approve, can I get a motion to approve the minutes? I forgot to do that at the beginning.
So moved.
Okay, Lawrence moves the minutes. Can I get a second?
Second.
Burnick seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those
Aye.
opposed, same sign. They're approved. Moving forward. Okay, so now I have, what is this? I have to. Is that what we just did? Okay, so now we're moving that the two recommendations that we approved will be approved in the final report as edited in today's meeting. Staff is authorized to prepare the report and include any technical changes that are necessary. The chair and vice chair are authorized to make the final improvement to the final report of the legislature. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
Aye.
Aye. I'm opposed. That's why we had this whole discussion going forward, is so that we would know what we were approving for the fine recommendation.
So can I ask a clarifying question, because I'm confused about that too? Why are we saying that if we just saw what you put up there, what else are you changing, or what else would you add?
Yeah. So the study group can do this however they want. I just had a drafted motion. But however the study group wants the final approval, I'll be adding those recommendations onto the report, including with the draft legislation and the minutes from today's meeting. So I won't be making any substantive changes, just those additions.
Wait, so all of our minutes go in the legislative report
Yes.
of just this meeting, or all of our
All of the
meetings?
things.
Okay, so tell me what all goes in the legislative report
Um,
outside of what we just approved here today.
You'll see most of them, Madam Chair and members, are listed in the report. So you have the executive summary, enabling legislation, overview of each meeting, the recommendations, and then in the appendix, staff will be adding the meeting minutes and committee materials.
Go ahead, Representative
So
Lawrence.
Madam Chair, and probably this is what caused our discussion. Technically, based on what Nick has just said, is this preliminary report was kind of technically your draft of our final report. Right? I mean, is that how
That is correct, Representative.
So this was our foundation to start with for making a report on our findings.
Yes.
Well, so now, okay.
Madam Chair.
Well, I feel like, hang on one second. So I feel like, okay. Do we all want to see this final draft in our emails to sign off on it? Because now it is different than what we just showed.
Madam Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I'm Michelle Urick. I'm the Executive Director of the Legislative Coordinating Commission. And for many of the task forces and working groups that we work with, particularly when they are limited with time, often to get the report submitted, oftentimes what the groups will do is they will authorize the staff to prepare the report, distribute the report to members for comment, and then allow the chair and vice chair to review those comments and approve the final submission of the report. So that would allow for members to see the fully compiled final report before it's submitted if you were not able to convene another meeting.
Does the membership feel like we need to come back together to see the final report, even if it's just virtually? I would not be, I mean, geographically, time frame wise, I would not come back and it would be a very short meeting. Or before we make a motion, this is just open discussion. Or where are we okay seeing it an email, making an approve or not approve? And if there's comments to be had, then we would have a meeting set up to have further comments. I'm confused on why we're not seeing more of the actual final template that I sent, but it's okay. We just need to figure out how we navigate through it. So do we want to come back together seems like it would be like a very short meeting virtually for all of us to see what this final report is in front of us before we make the final approval? Representative Lawrence.
Madam Chair, based on what Nick has stated to me, we have everything before us to
Yes.
make this final report.
Yes.
I'm always more comfortable having a final say on it, but I think we have everything in front of us except for every minute, right? Or the approved minutes. So it's the only part we're missing as far as everything that you requested to be in the official report. And any committee materials, which is anything we've had up to this point, any reports that were been done. The only thing we did change, which I agree with, and which was approved at this point in time, was we eliminated all of his, or all of the ideas, what do I say, the discovery ideas for each of the points. So I honestly think we have it before us today. Am I correct on that?
Go ahead, Nick.
Madam Chair, Representative Lawrence, I think you're correct in that this report will just be, the recommendation section of this report will be swapped out for the recommendations approved today, which is these 8 points and the draft legislation. And then the only other changes will be updating it to reflect the last months of minutes.
I don't think we've landed anywhere on so we have all of the material in front of us. Or Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think it's a bad idea for us to pull back together. You know, if we have a chance to review the final report in front of us, so it's clean, so that we all feel comfortable. I just am sensing some angst with different members. So what I would suggest is we get the final report, have it emailed to us in advance. We can review it. And then we can pull together for a short Zoom, a virtual meeting to make the final approval so that it's in front of us. We see it tangibly in front of us so we know exactly what we're voting on. So that would be my recommendation.
So because we don't have a calendar time, does 2:30 on Friday, the 20th work for everybody to jump on a half-hour Zoom for final approval? Nick says he can get all of this done and into our mailboxes tomorrow.
Oh.
And so then that way we can move, because then that keeps them in the timeline that we're not making staff do any work over the holiday. We would approve it Friday, keep it moving, and it's good to go for legislation. The only thing we would be reviewing is the final recommendation. We're not touching the landing spot legislation. Members, does 2:30 Friday, the 20th work for a virtual? We just need a quorum at that point. Bakeberg, can I get some thumbs up online? Bakeberg, Kunish. I don't know where everybody else. Okay, Kroon, Farnsworth. He might be. We're good here. It's online, so it'd be real quick.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I had to go remote to pick my kid up from piano. I don't have my schedule in front of me, so I don't know if Friday is good for me or not. I apologize.
That's okay. You'll get the information in your email by tomorrow. If you could just review it, and if you cannot make it, can you just communicate with one of the members?
Yes.
Okay, sounds great. So we will do a very quick Zoom recap. Friday, December 20th at 2:30. Staff will send out the recommendations along with the language legislation that you all see with the Zoom link. This will be for members only. Public is welcome to watch, but we will only be making recommendations and suggestions to the final report. Any other discussion? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.